G'day everybody, welcome to my freezing cold workshop. I am going to make some mop sanders today. This is a super useful tool that costs you basically nothing, except for the cost of a couple pieces of sandpaper and some old bolts that you have lying around. Basically, it allows you to do internal curved sanding and sanding odd shaped objects really quickly and efficiently and smoothly. And the best part is, it's not going to cost you very much at all. So this was done with 240. It's forming a little mop quite nicely. It is really polishing the inside of this bowl, but there are some deep scratches from the carving process that it's not removing. So I think I probably need to make one that's about 120 grit or maybe something in between and remove those scratches and then go back to polishing with this fine one. But they're pretty simple to make, so, I can use these for a long time. So now I've got some 180s, slightly different pad, but similar idea. Made this one a little bit smaller, cutting out a star shape. I'll use the outsides as well in the same way, just to bulk it out. It all acts the same. I have a whole bunch of 240 grit sandpaper here. I bought a box of this Festool sandpaper a couple years ago. I just have too much of it right now. I know that it's worth money. I'm not saying that these are free, but you are making a tool, so this is worth it as far as I'm concerned. Even if you paid $1 a sheet and you put, 12 or 15 sheets onto this thing and you get a heap of use out of it, that's still a pretty cheap tool. If you don't want to sit around and watch me do this, all you need to do is essentially cut these sandpapers up so until they look like raggedy little stars and shove them on a bolt. But I'll give you a couple tricks along the way that make this whole operation a little bit easier. You could do this with really coarse sandpaper if you wanted a little mop that cut really quickly. You could do it with super fine sandpaper if you wanted a little polishing mop, and you can make it any size you like. But I'm gonna make a full-sized one based on these 150mm sheets because I don't have one that size yet and I think it'll be useful. First thing we're gonna do is make a little template. Do you have to do this? Not really. You could just cut the sandpaper up, but this makes the job a bit easier. This does not need to be perfect. I'm drawing the size of this sandpaper onto some MDF. I'm gonna mark the center and the center of a couple of these holes. Now we can just cut that out with the bandsaw, cut some slices in it till it looks like a little sun, and we can use those slots to guide our little snap knife to cut the sandpaper. I just need to draw some lines on here that will show me where to cut on the bandsaw. I could have cut this out with a circle jig, but it doesn't need to be perfect, so let's just get this done quick, which is my general motto for making tools. Decide how far in to the sandpaper pad you want to cut. That will dictate how long the fingers are. The closer you cut to the center, the more moppy and floppy it is, and the more weird and nebulous a shape that you can sand. However, the longer those fingers are, potentially the weaker it's going to be, because as they come into the center, those fingers are wedge shaped and they're going to get narrower and narrower. Because this is such a large pad, I am going to not cut in any further than that line that I've drawn around that line of holes. Okay, so I've got my limit line. That's where the lines, my cuts are going to stop. And now I can just use those little black marks that I've marked around the outside to draw my radius lines. Now, you can see that they're not currently covering the whole area, so I'm going to add some additional lines as well, but I'll start with the ones that I have marked out. I'm gonna tap a tiny little nail in the center because that will give me a location to place the ruler around and allow me to mark both lines pretty easily. This step isn't strictly necessary. Okay, back to the bandsaw. Cut out those little slices. Now we're ready to start cutting. It's important if you're using a sandpaper pad like this that has lots of holes, that you've lined up those holes with one of your cut lines. See here, the cut line is moving through the hole. If you don't do that, one of your slices will essentially just be whole and it'll fall off or tear off really easily. Now this doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just going to align it, flip it over, press it down, use my snap blade, mark my starting point, and start cutting. When your snap blade is totally messed up and curved, just break the end off, keep cutting. And that is the first one made. Lots of little fingers there. Now, if you didn't make a template, you could just cut these a little bit randomly. This one was cut a little bit randomly. It's fine, but I think the finer you can make these fingers and the more regular you can make them, the better this little sander will be. So I'm just gonna do a bunch more pads. You can do as many or as few as you want. If you don't have very many, it won't be very effective because it won't be a great mop. But the more you can shove on there, then the thicker it's gonna be and it'll make a nice bushy mop of sandpaper that will allow you to sand curves really easily. So next 10 minutes of my life is just cutting slices. But I have seen some people put these in a stack and try and cut the whole lot with a bandsaw or an old hacksaw blade or a jigsaw. All of those methods may work, but you're going to destroy that blade. And a bandsaw blade is worth a lot more than this stack of 12 pieces of sandpaper to me. So a snap blade, which is worth next to nothing, I can snap off every, I don't know, twice per piece of sandpaper, and it's just a way cheaper and more effective way of doing this, I think, because I don't want to destroy my other tools to make a tool. Okay, only other tip I have for cutting sandpaper, and this applies whether you're doing this or just trying to cut sandpaper to size. Don't cut it with the blade on the sand side, cut it from the back. That should be self-explanatory, but it'll make your blades last longer. Otherwise you're just literally sanding them down. Even coming from the back, you're still wrecking your blades. So snap blade is the way to go. Okay, now we're at the kind of fun part, I guess. Look, none of this is particularly exciting, but using these is very, very fun. We've just got to stack them together on a bolt. So rummage through your bolt collection and find a nice long one because the length will help you when you're using it. If you don't have much length here, you can't deep inside a bowl or a cup or whatever object you're trying to sand. Now, I found this here, which is great. It's like 70 mil. However, there's no thread down the bottom. And so my sandwich of sandpaper is not going to be compressed because I can't bring the nut right down to it. So ideally, you've got a long bolt that has thread the whole way. I'll have a quick look and see if I can find something that does have thread the whole way. If I can't, we'll just sandwich washers on top of the sandpaper and that should keep it squished. Okay, so that was a waste of time. That one that I have is going to be the best bet. Now I've lost it. Here it is. So I'm just gonna have to stack washers on top. That's fine, I have washers. Things that you'll need. Hot glue, not strictly necessary, but makes it stronger. Place a washer on the end. Start with your first piece of paper, sandpaper down. The reason I love doing this with circular sanding pads is that they already have the center hole in them. They're already circular. It's just easy. Then we're gonna put one with the sandpaper facing up. So we're making a sandwich, and then you just repeat that, down, up, down, up. If you were creating something for a specific task that you knew you wanted to mainly be sanding downwards, you could have all of them facing down. But it just seems to me Like alternating is probably the most logical thing to do. Although I'm sure someone might have an opinion on that. The internet usually does. Part of me feels like it would be really useful to actually glue the fabric parts back to back so that there was none of that felt exposed, because it doesn't sand, it just kind of gets in the way. However, I feel like the time that would be required to do that would negate the efficiency of making these things. Okay, so you can see I have a bunch of bolt there that is unthreaded, so I cannot compress this mop. So, washer box. What have I got? They'll fit, great. I also know I have a heap of spring washers, so I'm going to incorporate them into the stack because I never really use them. If you just did this with a chunk of threaded rod, you wouldn't need this ugly spring washer shank. This really does not please me. It is probably going to be abrasive. It doesn't look neat, but I think for what I'm trying to do today, it's okay. And then you need your nuts. I always double nut these to stop them coming undone. If you've got the spring washers, you might not need it. Before you tighten it up, it's worth putting a whack of hot glue under that head in between the washer and in between the bolt. It just stops this whole thing spinning. You can put some hot glue in around the shank on the inside there, and even in between some of those if you need to. What you're trying to avoid is you spinning the bolt and this thing's just staying still when it's in your drill. Enough tension with the nuts will stop that happening. The hot glue helps a little bit. Couple other things that are worth doing. Depending on which bolt you've used, it's probably pretty abrasive there. So you can smooth that off first, that would help. You could grind that down really nice and smooth. I also think it's worth hot gluing something over that. I found it useful to hot glue some actual sandpaper over that, because if you are going into the bottom of a bowl, it can stop the metal grinding on the bowl, but also just sand it a little bit. So that's kind of useful. But it kind of depends what use you're using this for. If you're just using the edge profile, then that's not totally unnecessary. But I've done that on some of my others. You can see that there. That one has one. Okay, one other thing. Depending on how much torque this has, how much resistance, how hard you're pressing it into the timber, sometimes a little threaded rod like this will spin in a drill chuck. So I have ground facets on one of them. You can see that there's a little shiny place there. I've ground 3 of them so that they match with a 3-jaw drill chuck. And that means you've got a really firm hold without this spinning. I'm going to tighten this up a little bit more and then we're ready to use it. You don't have to use these in a drill press. I've very often used them handheld, but depending on what you're trying to sand, this can make your life a little bit easier. You definitely need eye protection. You've got basically a whole lot of sandpaper that could fly off at any moment. I'm gonna sand this weird little noodle. It's just a little sculptural form. It's kind of hard to get in and sand those sorts of objects with any other, you could do it by hand, but it's really time consuming. Just getting a super smooth finish there. It's removing all of those aggressive grinding marks from the shaping. So you can see that as it's used, it gets more moppy, more loose. And even though we cut this into lots of thin fingers, I honestly think if they were thinner, it would be better. This is 240, so it's pretty fine. And I think for this piece, I probably could have used something more aggressive initially, so a 180 or a 120, and then moved up the grits. But This has just smoothed this off so wonderfully. It looks like driftwood that's been thrown around in the ocean for 100 years. And that is where these excel. You can use them inside a bowl, inside the curve of a piece of joinery, just so useful. They don't have to be made 150mm wide. You can make them with 125mm discs. If you want to, you can use 150mm discs, cut them smaller, and then use the excess by just putting those weird little curved bits onto the same mop. That's what I've done here. But again, you are making a tool. It's absolutely worth the money you spend on sandpaper. The better the sandpaper, the longer this tool will last and the more useful it'll be. The most expensive part of this is your time, generally. So put money into sandpaper and get yourself some nice threaded rod. Weld a little nut on the end or just Loctite it on the end. And you won't need to use a stack of spring washers like this idiot. But these are just so handy. It's wonderful to have a few of them around. There's so many times when I need to get into an area like that and I just don't want to be hand sanding it for hours. So go make yourself a mop sander. It will save you time. I hope you found this useful. In terms of products, there's a lot of sandpaper that you can get from Timbecon, really high quality stuff from Merca. That would be wonderful. If you wanted, in theory, you could make this out of old sandpaper that you weren't using anymore because it had already been used a lot on the random orbital sander. However, if the sandpaper is already blunt, then it's not going to do its job as well. So it's worth just putting good quality new sandpaper into this. Get yourself a box, make yourself a mop sander, good fabric backed paper like this, and they'll last a really long time. I hope you've got something out of it. Thanks for sticking with me today. I'll see you next week.